Well, that's an interesting picture of your desk there. How you guys doing? Let me log in real quick and see what I finally got. It took over 24 hours. It looked like it took the whole weekend to finally give me results on the test. Because like I said, all the professors are using Blackboard and they didn't all used to use Blackboard. So I'm going to look real quick here at the item analysis and just see if there's anything that sticks out. And we'll talk about test 2 for just a couple of minutes here. And then we'll finish, excuse me, finish up chapter 11. I'll bring up the screen in just a minute. Or I may just talk. Gesundheit. All right, so according to my analysis here, actually, I guess I could show you guys this. It's not sharing grades. It's just showing you the analysis. It shows grades. I'll turn it off real quick and then edit the video. So according to this, you guys see the screen okay? According to this, I had 27 good questions, 7 fair questions, 7 poor questions, and then 5, excuse me, couldn't figure out because they were probably essay questions. Pull my chat thingy out here. Okay, let's take a look at these questions and see what's wrong with them. What did I do wrong, if anything? So what I usually do is I'm going to put these questions in order of reverse average score to see what the average score was. I'm going to obviously skip the essay questions because I just want to look at multiple choice right now. Unless you guys want me to go over the subnetting. Does anybody want me to go over as a class the subnetting again? We can if you want, but let's look at the multiple choice questions for right now. So most of you guys look like you did pretty good on most of the multiple choice questions, but let's go through some of them here. Housing servers in a rack cabinet in a data center is known as co-location. You guys understand that? Looks like, yeah, very few of you got this question, but it's called co-location. A couple of you put MDF, main distribution facility. I want you to understand that's kind of similar, but an MDF, a main distribution facility, guys, that's usually the thing that's at your location that you own. That's like your networking closet, or it's the thing within your neighborhood that's providing services to your neighborhood, but it is not where you put your servers. And I didn't really talk a lot about that. I showed you some pictures of it. Some of these big co-location facilities in Las Vegas, for example. But that's the term co-location. If I was to Google for co-location facilities, that's what a co-location facility looks like on the inside. And each one of these cabinets has one or more servers in it, which belong to one or more companies. Most companies are going to rent, most large companies rent multiple cabinets or maybe one cabinet, and they put whatever they want in there. A small company might rent only one space in one of those cabinets. A very small company might rent a virtual machine that runs in one space of one of these cabinets. But this is what I spend a lot of my time doing, is standing in a co-location facility fixing stuff. Everybody okay with that question?
Yeah.
Okay. For those of you that missed it, if you have any questions, type it in chat or let me know. What are many companies starting to do with their servers and their data that requires, and this is what I talked about in the very last class before we took the test, is what's requiring so much move to more bandwidth. And so it was also co-location. So this is kind of like two flavors of the same question. If you got both of these questions on your test and you got them both wrong, I'm sorry about that. That's kind of a bad luck of the draw there, but the answer is co-location. Many companies are taking all of their data that used to live at their company site, and they're not putting those servers in the same closet with their MDF hardware, which is what they used to do. Everybody's now putting that stuff in the cloud, either co-locating or using software as a service, which we're going to talk about today, by the way. Let's see, which of the following is not typically found in an RFP submitted to vendors? The answer is a cost assessment. A cost assessment is part of the building block approach that we use to build our networks. The RFP is a part of cost assessment. Cost assessment is not a part of RFP, but all of these other items are in 99% of RFPs that are out there. How we're going to choose the winner of the bid, what the goals of this new network is that we're trying to get installed or upgraded, what benchmarks we're looking for, what certain minimum speeds and minimum requirements and numbers of users are we trying to support. And possibly all of these are found in an RFP cost assessment. So that's kind of a tricky question that a lot of people miss, but that was the answer on it. So a lot of you put all of these are found, but 40% of you got it right. So probably end up having to give everybody credit anyway, because like I said, if more than 50% of the people miss a question, I typically throw it out. Let's see what I can also put this in a little bit different order as well. There's that same difficulty score. So questions that are not difficult are questions that most people answered right. What's the reason that T-carrier service still exists and is available? Let's take a look at that. I talked a little bit about T-carrier service. Actually, I talked probably more than I should have about T-carrier service. But the only reason that T-carrier service is still available is because there are some legacy T-carrier accounts out there. Some people have legacy equipment, but that's the real answer right there. SONET service or fiber optics is not available everywhere, especially if you're a rural company out in the country somewhere. You're not going to have fiber optic services, or if you're in an older part of town. T-carrier services are multi-year. Sometimes they are difficult to get out of, but usually if you call a company and say, hey, I have a T circuit, I have a T1, I would like to upgrade to something faster like an OC1, they will be very happy to cancel that T-carrier service and upgrade you to optical service. The phone company doesn't want, I shouldn't say the phone company, the networking companies don't want to support T-carrier services anymore. It's legacy service. It's not cheaper and faster than DSL or cable. There are other technologies, assuming that you're in a big city like Houston, there are many other technologies available other than T-carrier service, and that's not the right answer either. So that's the only answer that made sense on that one. Again, I'm going to have to probably give everybody credit because not enough people answered the question right, in my opinion here, or in the review here. What's the cheapest and most commonly found WAN topology? I'm surprised so many people missed this one. More than 50% of you got it, but several of you missed it. The cheapest and most commonly found WAN is star. Some of you put ring topology. As I mentioned in class, ring is probably smarter. It's a better idea. Mesh is even smarter than that, but ring and mesh cost more money than the star topology. This is the most common WAN topology is a star topology for several reasons. Not just because it's the cheapest, but it's because it grows naturally. You start with the central headquarters and you branch out across the country or across the world from there. Some of you put a bus WAN topology. We don't really use bus WAN topology at all. That's a bad idea. Daisy chaining our cities together. If anybody disagrees, by the way, with any of these questions, like ones that I didn't throw out that you missed, you should be able to go back and look at your test. If there's any that you missed that you disagree with, send me an email or let's talk. And if you are good enough at convincing me that you're right, I'll give you credit. Ethernet protocol is known as contention-based. It's not controlled. Ethernet is not a controlled network. It's contention-based. Carrier sense multiple access. That's why we can have things like collisions. Let's see. Any questions on that? I think that was fairly self-explanatory. I think there's a couple of you didn't take the time to look up the definition of Ethernet. And we're out to lunch. There we go, and we're back. Do you guys want me to look at any more? Do you see any on the screen here that you had a question about, guys? Backbone networks, T-carrier service.
What was the grade distribution for exam 2?
Good question. Average score right there is 77.57, so not great. But again, I'm going back and looking. I suspect a lot of people messed up the subnetting. So I'm going to go back and look at the subnetting, because if you got all of the multiple choice right or missed only a couple, if you messed up the subnetting real bad, you'll end up with a score like a 77. So, oops, sorry. I think I did a weird thing there. So, and it took everybody on average 2 hours to finish the test. So I'm still going and looking individually on all of the tests. I need to finish that up so that you guys get an idea of your grade. But that kind of indicates there's going to be a significant curve to me, like at least 10 points at this point. If I just had to squint my eyes and look at it, okay? So let's stop looking at that. I want to talk about, just before we look at the notes, a couple of important tools, because what I'm trying to work on is a replacement or a couple more assignments. And these are easy assignments. I'm not trying to give you a bunch of stuff right at the end of class here, but I kind of am. Trying to introduce you to some things, some invaluable tools. I had this situation. Let me describe the situation here. I had a switch that I had installed, a network switch I installed on a network, and I turned on DHCP on the switch, meaning, and it was a managed switch, meaning if I needed to log into that switch and make some changes to it, I need an IP address, and I turned on DHCP so that it would just get an IP address from the DHCP server. I didn't really care what it was, because I rarely need to log into my switches. All I would need to do, if I did need to log into it, is all I would need is the MAC address of the switch, which I wrote down. I put in some notes. The MAC address of the switch was 00B0, whatever. And then I would log into my DHCP server and look at the reservations and see what IP address was assigned to that switch. Well, I couldn't find it. I thought, what's going on? Did I turn off DHCP? So I needed a way to look at all of the machines on my network. So I've already mentioned these things before, such as you could use, if you wanted to see everybody that's on your local network, or at least all the servers on your local network, there's a few things that you can do already from the command line of Windows. You could type in ARP --A, and it will give you a list of all of the known servers on your network. Now, this may not be a full list of everybody on your network. This is just a list of devices that have already spat out information. And it's also not that useful of a list. It gives me these physical addresses, and then I either have to go look these up or look up the first 6 characters of that MAC address to go see what that is. Or you could download a tool that essentially does port scanning or ARP scanning. So I just went Googling around for advanced network scan tools, and there are several that are available. I think this is the one I downloaded. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the one I downloaded. What I needed to do is I needed to run a tool on my computer or my PC here to look at everything that I'm capable of looking at on my LAN segment, not by IP address, but by MAC address, to see what's out there. So I'd like you guys to try installing one of these. You can install this one or others. Just Google for IP scan tool. If you have a Mac, search for IP scan tool in the Mac store. What I determined, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go run this on a machine on a LAN that one of my customer LANs, because that's where I was at. Give me one sec. I need to remote view a machine in that lab. Here it is. That's what I was looking for. So I'm remote viewing a machine that's connected to a network at my co-location facility where this switch was, and I installed this LAN tool. Give me just a second to log into it here. I'll show you the screen. Okay. Happens to be an old school Windows server here. I think I installed it on this one. Let me go look. If I didn't, I installed it on a different machine, but I'll find it real quick. In the meantime, if you're in front of your PC, you guys could be installing, downloading, installing that tool real quick too. Let me look under control panel. Programs. I think I might have installed it on a different computer. Oops. Don't ask me again. Might have installed it on this one. I'm remote viewing a computer that's remote viewing another computer that's remote viewing another computer that's remote viewing a fourth computer. I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio at this point. You know what I'm talking about, by the way?
Eyes Wide Shut?
No, that wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio. What was that movie called? Actually, I'm having a mind blank right now. It's a movie about dreaming within dreams programs. Well, maybe I installed it on my laptop. That's okay. I'll just go back to what I was doing here in remote. Well, you know, I can install it. I could go ahead and install it on one of those machines, but let's just finish installing it on my local network. I wanted to show you on that network. Advanced IP scanner. Yeah, let me go ahead and do that because it won't make that much sense on my home network. It's too small of a network. And that's not where the problem occurred.
Do we install this on our VM in the lab?
You can install it on the, it's not going to hurt anything to do that. You can install it on your home network. I'm just trying to show you a real world example of why I installed it. SolarWinds makes one too, but I didn't really like theirs. I don't like a lot of stuff that SolarWinds does. This will make a lot of sense in just a minute. I'm sorry, I'm going a little slow here, guys, but very super useful tool. This thing will go out and look for all of the devices at layer 2, not layer 3, but layer 2 on your network. So you might have additional machines running on your network that are in different IP ranges that you're not aware of. This is really good to use, by the way, if you think that somebody's hacked into your network via Wi-Fi. It'll also give you, in this example, will give you brand names of stuff if it knows the brand name. Now, some of these machines in this lab are virtual machines, so it's going to say VMware. It's not going to say, you know, what the machine is, but others will say Dell or Cisco or TP-Link, or it'll actually give you a brand name, doing the same thing basically that we did. Okay, I'm going to click on scan. So it's finding, first of all, it's operating right now just in the 10.200.80 network. But it might find other IP addresses. I've resolved the problem, so I won't find that. I found the machine, I had given it an IP address outside of the range that I'm in. So it had like a 192.168 IP address, and that's why I couldn't talk to it. So there's a lot of stuff on that local network inside the colo there. You can see there's a Sophos firewall, which is I was talking about 4397. There's a couple of Sophos firewall. These are Dell servers. Supermicro, another Dell server.
Are those Sophos appliances, or does it just give itself a specific MAC address?
No, those are actual Sophos real machines. I use actual Sophos firewalls in there. There's a bunch of VMware servers, so that's why you see VMware a bunch of times, because these aren't real machines. These are virtual machines. There's some more Sophoses again. Some of these don't have names because it couldn't find what they were, but you'll notice that most of my hardware in there is Dell. So run that either on Inception. Thank you, by the way. Yeah, not Titanic, Inception. So right now I'm only a couple of dreams deep on Inception here. What do you guys think of that movie? Did you like that movie, Inception? It gave me a headache. After about the first hour, I got confused and stopped watching it. So and I went back to it later after I had a little bit to drink and it made more sense. So run this on your local network if you want. Like I said, you'll probably only come up with a very small list of 2 or 3 or 4 computers, but you might come up with a bunch of stuff you don't know is in your home. Like if you're at your parents' home or your friend's home and they have smart lights or smart cameras or smart any other smart devices in their house, they may pop up on this list. So this is one tool that network managers use to help them manage networks and automatically discover. This is called an auto discovery tool. Now, some of those diagramming tools that we use, not draw.io, but some of the more fancy diagramming tools use this as a base to begin drawing your network map. Just ran it and found your smart plug. So you got a smart plug in your house. That's cool. What do you do with the smart plug? Just turn things off and on? You got it plugged into a light or something?
You turn on a lamp.
Yep. So a lot of the network, the fancier tools that you purchase start by running a scan, and they give you all of these things, and you can simply drag and drop these things out into, and that's what it's actually having me do. So if I had the more expensive tool that they sell, I could start drawing a map from this. Some of the devices, you'll notice I can get more information out of them like that. It might identify what the OS is running that it found, or what the application is running that it found. Now there's another thing that you can download and install. This is an IP address scanner, but there are also things called port scanners. Does anybody know what a port scanner is?
Yeah. Use them to do bad things.
You don't want to see my email, excuse me. Turn my email off. Download free port scanner. An IP address scanner looks for IP addresses. A port scanner looks for particular port numbers. Advanced port scanner, anywhere from ports 1 to 65536. You can do this. You use this, by the way, to determine whether there are applications running somewhere on your network, and maybe you don't know where they're running, but they're running somewhere on your network. You don't know where they're running. You don't know what is running. A port scanner, and it will take a lot longer to run if you run it on your network, because it's going to try to look and see for every IP address that it finds what services are running on that IP address. So you could go ahead and download this tool as well and try that one. You might find that you've got ports open on devices that you were not aware of, or you might find a hidden web server running on a device in your home, like a refrigerator or something like that. Now, what hackers use port scanners all the time, by the way. They point port scanners to the internet. These aren't really intended for doing that. You're not supposed to point these things to the internet and say, go search the internet for open ports. Because what they'll do is they'll identify servers that are publicly available to access on the internet. And then hackers use these lists, these discovery lists, and they go back and look at them and try to then either manually or brute force hack into those particular servers. So you should not be doing port scanning to the outside world. These are designed specifically for LAN management, not for hacking the internet, although you can certainly use them to hack the internet. So I'm on my little local network here at home. I'm just going to click scan and see what comes up. Not going to run it on that client's network because there was way too much on there. And this is telling me not just that I've got machines running at these IP addresses, but it also tells me what services are running. So this machine, whatever that is, has both HTTP and FTP running. This machine has only HTTP running. This machine has a whole, this is my Windows server, so it's got a buttload of stuff running on it on different port numbers. Here's all the different port numbers, by the way, that it's using. There is a phone. It tells me if I want to log into that phone, it's going to say, hey, you should be able to log into that phone. Maybe on port 80. Here's the port list. The port list can be huge, by the way. There's a printer that I can access on port 25, 80, 110. So all these different ports may or may not be available to access it. But you see how powerful these tools are? This will help you find if you've got stuff on your network that's not supposed to be on your network, especially if it's pointing to your own IP address of your computer, like the IP address that's on this computer right now that I'm using. IP config is 10.0.0.197. Let me see if it came up in this list. That's the name of the machine there. It says I got 3 folders available that I'm sharing, which is true. This is actually a computer I'm borrowing from somebody named Tom, so, or kind of indefinitely using. He owed me a bunch of money, so I ended up with his laptop. So all these ports are potentially open on my laptop that I'm using. Maybe I don't want all those ports open, especially if this was exposed to a shared network, like a Starbucks or the airport or whatever. You might want to close some of these ports, like port 25, I'll tell you right now, very dangerous for port 25 to be open for inbound traffic. So try that out on your local network and see if you find anything interesting that you were not aware of. Cisco, I have
Professor, do you have a
I've got a Cisco phone sitting downstairs. What's that?
do you have a Pentium 2 on your network, that 440FX?
Where?
Right there. 159 is the IP address.
Oh, yeah, that's an old computer. It's an old laptop. I just turned it on actually earlier this morning, just because I was experimenting with cracking passwords. So yeah, it's an old computer. It's sitting on there. So there's my Ring camera, by the way. So you can log into my Ring cam if you knew how to do that. But there's the IP address. Of course, you're not going to be able to get into any of this, guys, because it's all behind my firewall. It's on a local network. But these are examples of very powerful tools that network managers use so that it's basically sniffing your network. Okay, so go check those tools out. I'm not making any assignments yet for them, just pointing them out. All right, so where were we last class period? I think I was on the other machine, not this one. I don't recall if we finished chapter 10 or not, so, or excuse me, chapter 11 or not. So give me just a minute to bring it up. She doesn't look like the kind of person that does port scanning, by the way. Excuse me, my nose is itching. Anybody have COVID-19? Or is everybody healthy?
That's why we're all staying home. We're trying to avoid it.
One of my clients, by the way, is a lab, and I was about to go over there a couple of days ago to do some computer work, and I said, "Wait, hold off. We think one of our lab technicians is showing signs of COVID virus." So she got tested. They went and tested everybody in the lab. Every single person in the lab, like 9 employees, every single one of them tested COVID positive. So one person got it, and she spread it to everybody, even given the fact that at this lab, they do lab testing for other things there. They all wear gloves, they all wear masks, and the one person still gave the COVID-19 virus to everybody else, or they all got it from somewhere. Only one person is showing any symptoms of it, though. So interesting stuff. So needless to say, I'm not going over to that lab for 2 weeks. I'll wait for anything in that lab to die first before I go over there doing more work. Let's see. Where's my chat window? Oh, I didn't mean to stop sharing. Hang on. I meant to, I clicked on the wrong thing. Oh, I guess we weren't quite done with chapter 10. We were almost done with chapter 10, or did we finish chapter 10? You guys remember? It was so long ago. It was so last week. Pretty sure we did, but let me just double check real quick here. Everybody's healthy. That's good. Yeah, I think we got to the end of that. I'm certain we did. So anyway, chapter 11. Network security. And there's a bunch more to network security than this chapter 11. But let's talk about very generally what network security is for the remainder of this class here. First of all, network security is probably one of the most important things that any company does with respect to their intellectual property or their data, because everything's networked these days. It's always been a major business concern, but now that everything is in the cloud, now that everything is connected, it's pretty much the #1 priority, right past employee security and employee making sure your employees are safe, not keeping employees away from each other, although that's part of it as well. Computers and the internet have redefined the nature of information security, again, because everything is connected on the internet, and especially right now. In fact, there's more hacking going on and more issues going on right now because we're all at home and we're all using remote access tools. Many companies have relaxed or lowered down or changed their firewall rules to allow their employees to get in from various locations. But because of that, if they're not real careful with their firewall rules and they're not employing things like VPN, bad guys can also get into their networks as well. So as I've mentioned in a previous class, the average value of organizational data and applications far exceeds the cost of just about any other asset for most companies. The organizational data is the major asset of most companies. If you lose your organizational data, whether it's accounting data or intellectual property you've created, you're out of business. Losses associated with security failures can be large. They can put businesses out of business. They can also cause loss of consumer confidence. You can also be fined significantly if you are found to have a data breach. such as Equifax. And if you guys have not heard about the Equifax data breach, by the way, you need to go research the Equifax data breach so that you're familiar with what it was, because it was a very major breach because it involved pretty much everybody with a credit card. Equifax data breach. Furthermore, and I'm surprised Equifax is not out of business, by the way, Equifax was found to be liable by the federal government. Equifax had to agree to pay or give free credit monitoring to everybody that was potentially affected, which is billions of dollars. By the way, I filled out a form. I was supposed to have gotten like, I don't know, 110 bucks back, but so many people filled out these forms that nobody gets any money, and all that you're going to get is free credit monitoring for 6 months. So go read up on your own on the Equifax data breach and recognize why that was such an egregious, terrible thing. And we'll talk about it a little bit more about why it was bad, but I want to get more into this. That's the end. Sorry. I jumped all the way to the end. I'll just scroll back in the beginning here. Okay. Here is the security triangle that most network managers are using. Most of you probably think about security issues in terms of unauthorized access, but that's really just part of it. It's a large part of it, but it is just part of it. People who are not supposed to getting into your data. But availability and integrity are also very important parts of network security, and I'll describe what each of these is. Most of you probably can guess what confidentiality is. This is protection of the organizational data from unauthorized access or accidental disclosure. Sometimes that happens. People accidentally. I do it all the time. I try not to. I try to be careful, but I'll bring something up on the screen, for example, during class, and I always, oops, I didn't mean to show you that. So I got to try to keep from doing that. The integrity is assuring that the data has not been irrevocably altered or destroyed over time. And then the availability is the network or the data available when I need it to be available. This is actually these days probably more of a concern than the confidentiality. Yes, that's a big concern, but right now availability is a huge, huge issue because everybody right now is at home. We're not sitting at our offices where we have very good network access tools. We're using our laptops or our computers at home, and we're trying to use various remote accessing or VPN tools, or maybe we don't even have those available tools to use to access our networks and our organizational data. So we can't do our jobs if our network's not available where we happen to be. So that's a big, big deal right now. First of all, let's talk about security threats. A threat, by the way, that term, you know what threat means. That is basically just anything that can disrupt network security or network continuity or availability. Threats to business continuity, that is being able to continue doing your business, include these three general groupings: disruptions, which is a loss or reduction in network services, usually just temporarily, or destruction of data, my data's gone, or disasters such as Hurricane Harvey or COVID-19, which is, I would say that's a federal, or no, that's not a federal disaster, that's a world disaster, isn't it? Threat of unauthorized access, AKA intrusion. So we call all unauthorized access, the generic term for that is intrusion. It's not always external hackers. In fact, most unauthorized access, most intrusions involve employees. Why do you think that is, guys? Why do you think employees are the ones that companies are having to watch the most? Any idea? Any thoughts? No thoughts? Or are you finding your mic button? Feel free to turn on your mic or type in the chat window what you think. That's part of it. Employees can make mistakes. In other words, employees can accidentally disclose information to the wrong people. That's also true, Julie. They already have access. They already have access to a network. Employees are going to be curious a lot of times and try to get into stuff sometimes. I'm not saying they all do, but if I was to go to work for a company and I wanted a pay raise, I might be very tempted to go try to look into my company's network to see if I could get access to the payroll data, to see if I can figure out how much the next person is making, how much the guy in the next cubicle is making. So I know, hey, I happen to know Joe's making, $50,000 a year. I'd like a pay raise, please. Yeah, accidental. That's part of it. Another reason why employees are most often the ones that are accessing data they're not supposed to is because we caught them. Not that they really are the most commonly found intruders. They're the ones that are just most often caught because we're watching employees much more closely than we watch anything else. Unfortunately, if you were to ask Mattress Mac, anybody ever talk to Mattress Mac and you ask Mattress Mac, Jim McInville, what's his number one worry with respect to theft? He says, man, most customers that walk in the door aren't going to walk away with a couch or a computer or try to steal something out of gallery furniture. It's the employees you got to watch, unfortunately. And he said that to me several times. He said, unfortunately, you can't fully trust your own employees, especially when you're a good guy and you basically hire people that are sometimes living on the streets. He's a good guy for doing that, but you got to watch him sometimes. A control, make sure you understand what that term means. A control is any safeguard, doesn't have to be a network control. It can be a control is any safeguard put in place that reduces or eliminates the threat to a network security asset. Okay, so there's three terms you need to know: threat, control, and asset. You see that in the chat window? I just typed it into the chat window. A threat is anything, or let's start with asset. An asset is anything on your network that has value. That could be a server, a workstation, a camera, data, a database, a network, wireless, a Wi-Fi network, for example. Those are all considered assets. A threat is anything that can potentially harm that asset. And a control is anything you put in place to mitigate. That's the term we use a lot in network security. And we want to mitigate the threat by putting a control in place to protect a particular asset. The most common control that most of you are familiar with is a preventative control. This mitigates or stops a person from acting or an event from occurring. Acts as a deterrent by discouraging or restraining somebody from acting. What is an example? Can anybody think of an example of a preventative control that keeps you from
A password?
Yeah, password. That's at the application layer. How about a door knock, a door lock? That's also a preventative control. At the physical layer, you have controls that you apply at every single layer from physical on up. And by the way, I'll just tell you right now, as I've mentioned before, anything that you can do down at the physical layer is usually better. If you can put preventative controls at the physical layer, you don't have to worry about above layers. If somebody can't find the door, can't get in the door, somebody can't get on your network because you don't have Wi-Fi, then you don't have to worry about putting a bunch of Wi-Fi network rules in place because you don't have a Wi-Fi network. That's layer one. A detective control, that is where we are as network managers revealing or discovering unwanted events, such as running that IP scanner that I showed you earlier, or that port scanner, and discovering, holy shit, I've left my web server port 80 is open, or a certain port number is open that anybody who wants to, who's on my local network, can go log into that server and use it as an email server. A corrective control is basically related to a detective control. It's putting anything in place to remedy an unwanted event or situation. Like if I discovered I got a problem on a server, well, I need to go close that door. I need to go maybe turn off that service or put a firewall in place or remove this Wi-Fi network from this server network because I don't want Wi-Fi on it. So preventive, detective, and corrective. The best place to do your network security mitigation, threat mitigation, is at the preventive level. Stop things before they happen. The next best thing is detective controls, but we don't want to be doing a lot of that. Network managers do a lot of that, but we usually use automated tools like those IP scanners and weekly reports, automated tools that look for trends and like maybe, hey, we noticed that there's a bunch of failed login attempts from a particular IP address, like 50 in a row in a 1 minute period. Well, that brings up a red flag. That means that that's probably a computer trying to hack into your computer, because people cannot type in a password 50 times in 1 minute. You don't want to be doing a lot of corrective control. You want to be doing a lot of preventive control. Detective controls, we usually use an automated process, or we do it on a weekly or sometimes even a monthly basis. Risk assessments. Now, how do you determine what is a asset and how do you determine what a potential risk might be to an asset? We used to use spreadsheets, and a lot of companies simply still use spreadsheets where we would open a spreadsheet like a Google document. Or here, I'll just open a spreadsheet real quick and show you. I don't know if I have Excel on here. Probably Office on here. Oh, I got Excel 2010, cool. So this is the way we used to do it back in the old days as network managers, before we had some nice criteria to go by. We would basically create an XY axis, and we would list all of our assets down the list here, like servers, workstations, LAN, data, employees. Employees are an asset as well, by the way. You guys are assets. Backups. Every single asset that you can think of that has anything to do with your network. And on the x-axis here, we would list all the potential. I'll do this at the top here. We would insert all the potential threats like fire, flood, hurricane. These are all natural disasters. And then I might list like unauthorized access. And then I might have like hardware failure. All the potential threats that might harm business continuity. And usually, by the way, when we're doing this with a spreadsheet, insert a few more rows, we literally put in here specific servers, not just servers, because you might have servers in a bunch of different locations. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do insert an entire row. Server 1 in Houston, and then server 2 in Las Vegas. And then we would decide upon a numbering or a grading scheme. I like to use a scheme of 1 to 100, 100 being the most important thing to look at, and 1 being the least important thing to look at. So in this little spreadsheet that I'm making, I have a server in Houston. Hardware failure, how critical would that be to a server? Well, hardware failures are fairly critical when it's a server, not so critical when it's a workstation, because workstations are literally a dime a dozen. Also, if a workstation fails, I can usually tell that employee, okay, well, here's another workstation, go use that. Also, there's not much data on that, so I usually assign a pretty low number to a workstation. But to a server, I'll assign a pretty high number with respect to hardware failures. Or I should say hard drive failures. Hard drives are going to fail. Whether they're spinning hard drives or solid state drives, they're going to fail. So that might be a 90th percentile thing happening, and this might be a 10th percentile thing happening. hard drives are going to fail in workstations as well. In fact, workstations probably are going to fail more often than servers because they're not built as well. They're not built with enterprise-grade hardware, but I only gave it a 10 because, as I mentioned before, what I'm trying to assess here is this is a risk assessment. What is the impact to my business, to my company? Well, if one workstation dies, if this is clerical workstation 1, I know I spelled clerical wrong. How important is a clerical employee? Well, she's writing letters, so it's probably not that important. I'll give it a 5. Now, if it's an engineer workstation or a salesperson workstation, maybe that's more important because, you know, if my salespeople aren't selling the product, I'm not making any money, so I might give them a 10. An engineer, if they're not making the product and using, you know, AutoCAD or whatever it is, that's probably important too. So I'll give them a 10, but I'll give servers a much higher number with respect to failure. Now let's take a look at some of these natural disasters like fires and floods and hurricanes. Server 1 in Houston, what's the likelihood? You got to think of several things here. How much value do you think I should place on a server in Houston with respect to a hurricane?
High value.
I'd say 100 on a scale of 1 to 100. Here's my scale, 1 to 100. I'd say 100. Hurricanes don't happen very often, but when they do happen around here, they're pretty darn bad. So we need to make sure that, and we're not putting any controls in this. All that this is it's looking at 2 things: assets and potential threats against those assets, fires and floods. So now server 2 in Las Vegas Colo. Yeah, intruders might be a high thing because it's a co-location facility. So there can be physical intruders, network intruders, but it's probably not very likely that they're going to have any hurricanes in Las Vegas anytime soon. So I'll give that a 1. There's probably not going to be a fire in a co-location facility. And if there was, usually they have halon fire protection systems, which literally take all the air, take all the oxygen out of the air. So I'll give I like a 5. Not very likely to occur. There might be floods in Las Vegas, but again, when you put stuff in co-location facilities, they are protecting you against a lot of these natural disasters. How about, here's another one, how about power outages? Here's another thing you need to look at when you're listing out all these different assets. And these different risk assessment outlines, what these basically are outlines, which are basically just what I'm creating for you here. Because most people these days, most network managers can't possibly think of all the possible assets and the possible threats. There are threats you don't know about yet. Oh, some new virus, not COVID-19, but some new virus that was just discovered, a computer virus that was discovered last week that you as a network manager don't know about yet. Or some new hacking technique. Or so, yeah, power outages. That's a very common thing that occurs depending on where you're at. In a co-location facility, power outages are probably going to happen almost never, because that's one of the reasons why they're putting things in a co-location facility is because they have triple redundant, super backed up power with generators, and they're not in areas that get a lot of storms. But here in Houston, yeah, we have power outages all the freaking time, which have nothing to do with floods and fires and hurricanes. It just has to do with everybody turning on their air conditioning in the morning. So what you end up with is a spreadsheet with numbers in it, and you look at the items. The bottom line is this is all money, money, money. All these things are money. Where should you spend your money? Oops. So you want to look at things that are 190 and 80. Those are the things where you probably are going to, you might spend the most money, but you need to pay the most attention to. Anything that's a 1 or a 5 or a 10, you might want to mitigate, not with a lot of money, but maybe a little money or no money at all. In fact, most companies don't do the kinds of risk mitigation that you would do on a server, like redundant hard drives. They do what's called a passive mitigation, like insurance against destruction or loss of a workstation. I'll just get insurance to cover that. Or I'll set aside some money in my budget to cover that. Because workstations, in terms of money and how much they actually cost, I'm talking about total cost of ownership, is a few $100 versus a server going down or being lost. That can be a catastrophic loss of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars if it has a lot of data on it. Now, the good news is we don't have to come up with these spreadsheets. As I said before, we've got different risk assessment guidelines. You can go download. You just go Google for the NIST risk assessment guidelines. I like to use NIST. I've used NIST for a long time. And basically, these are downloadable spreadsheets a lot of times, or you can actually download programs. And generally what they do is you start off by choosing the area that your company operates in, whether it's in medical or finance or oil and gas or education, and you download a sample of basically an outline, which may or may not come with a spreadsheet, which you can then fill in. And you fill in all of your assets. It identifies what some of your potential assets might be. Excuse me.
Bless you.
So sorry. I'm going to have to save that for later. So risk management, you can learn a lot by just reading these guidelines. Risk management is a process that allows IT managers to balance operational and economic costs. That's what we're looking at, economic cost. You cannot afford, unfortunately, you cannot afford to spend all the money you want protecting your network. Turn your mic off if you're talking to somebody, by the way. So these guidelines help you determine what you should pay the most attention to. Risk management methodologies, and this is all kind of what I'm talking about right now. Threats, risk assessment steps, characterizing your system, identifying all the possible threats, identifying vulnerabilities in your network. What control should I put in place? The likelihood of something occurring. So I was doing that in that spreadsheet. The likelihood of a hurricane happening in Las Vegas is 0. So I'm not going to worry about the threat of a hurricane in Las Vegas, but I will worry about the threat of like a fire or an earthquake in San Francisco if I had servers there. Octave and COBIT have similar outlines and spreadsheets, but I recommend NIST. They're the oldest one. Okay, so in risk assessment, this is all contained within these guidelines. In risk assessment, you develop a risk measurement criteria. I simply chose the 1 to 100 criteria on a spreadsheet. I inventory all my assets that I have. Some companies don't have some assets. Some companies don't have servers at all. Their servers they're using software as a service, and so they don't have to worry about their servers being damaged. They just have to worry about, is the service provider backed up in some way? Identify all the threats against all the assets, document what existing controls you might have in place, test them. That's kind of what's missing out of here, by the way. Test those controls many, many times, by the way. I can't tell you how many times the companies come to me and said, we've got a problem, our server crashed, the hard drive in our server crashed, but luckily we've got backups. We've been making backups. I said, okay, cool. Where are your backups going? Well, it's going to, we use this program, this service called Crash Planner. We use Carbonite, and it gets backed up into the cloud. So I'll say, okay, where's your login data? Well, I don't remember that, or we didn't write it down, or it was in a file on the hard drive. Well, how am I supposed to get to that data if you didn't write it down? So that's one issue. The other issue is, well, we wrote it down. So this happened just a couple of weeks ago. Somebody's server crashed. It happened to be a home server, so it wasn't that important. Their server crashed. I went to log into their offline, I forgot who they were using, and they had not paid the bill in 6 months. So guess what? All of their backed up data was deleted. Some of those online companies will store your backup data for about 30 days, but if you don't pay them, they'll hold your data ransom and they will threaten to delete it if you don't pay them. CrashPlan is real good for doing that, by the way. Also, do not rely on Google Drive to be your backup, because you get what you pay for. Google Drive is essentially free unless you pay for their Google Drive services. So got to test those controls. If controls are not tested, then they might as well not be there. Let's develop some risk criteria here. This is a simple measurement. Let's look at impact areas. Financially, how will a threat impact our company? In productivity, how will a certain threat impact our company? In reputation, this is really super important for companies, and you might not think so, but like Equifax, for example, or maybe let's not use Equifax, let's use, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but, or Target. Let's use Target as an example. Target had a major data breach a few years ago. Do you guys remember the Target data breach? It happened, I guess, about 3 years ago now, where apparently hackers had gotten into Target's accounts and they were able to see people's credit card information. That was Target mitigated. They detected and found and closed those loopholes, but they were at risk of losing a lot of business, because if Target.com is not a reliable company to do e-shopping with, maybe you're not going to go use their website. So Target spent a lot of money, a lot of money to basically heal their reputation. For example, I got like a Target gift card for $50 because I was identified as a customer, and like 6 months of free credit monitoring. And their website got a lot better because they realized, hey, this is the wave of now, not just the wave of the future, but the wave of now. We will not be able to survive if we're just a brick and mortar store. We've got to offer our products online. So reputation is a big, big deal for a lot of customers. Legal, if in the case of Equifax, I don't know about Target, but in the case of Equifax, they got fined billions of dollars by the federal government, saying, not only did you guys screw up, but you screwed up for 6 months. You knew about it, or at least employees of Equifax. This was the real egregious thing about the Equifax data breach, is they were warned, not by employees, but they were warned by the hackers. The hackers warned and said, hey, by the way, guys, we can see everything about everybody's credit report that we want to. Equifax didn't believe them or ignored them or thought that wasn't important. Furthermore, the organization that was providing their infrastructure, which was Apache, by the way, told them in the form of emails that go out periodically, hey, that version of Apache that you're using, 2.2 or whatever it is, there's a huge data vulnerability in it. You need to make sure you upgrade Apache or you update it. Equifax was not updating their Apache. That's the web server software, by the way. They weren't updating their web server software. They were several months behind on that. So they were negligent in that, and the federal government agreed that they were negligent. They said, not only were the hackers telling you, which you could have ignored, but the people that make the software that you're using, the web server software, were telling you, hey, you need to upgrade, you need to upgrade, here's a vulnerability, you need to upgrade, and they weren't doing it because, you know, they didn't place that much importance on that. They didn't think that they were a target. That's the thing that kills most people, is they don't think they're a target. Well, guess what, guys? Everybody in this Zoom meeting right now is a target. And that's because the bad guys, they're not manually targeting certain industries and manually targeting certain servers. Everything is automated. Even hacking is automated. They don't know how big or small of a target you are. In fact, a lot of times small targets like your home servers or your home computers, you don't think you're a big target, so you don't spend extra money mitigating against unauthorized access. And sometimes you get pwned or owned. That's a hacker term for getting owned. Has anybody ever been owned before? Do you know what I mean when I say that? You've been
Owned with a P?
huh?
Owned with a P?
Yeah, why do we say it that way?
Because when you type it in, when you're playing like Counter-Strike or something, you type it wrong.
Yeah, sometimes that's how it was born. But we used to tell people, "Oh, I totally pwned you just now," or "I totally owned you just now because I headshot and killed you." When I own a server or I own somebody's workstation, it means I took over their workstation or their server. I changed the root password, and they can't get into it. If anybody watches Mr. Robot, they mentioned pwning a few times. Okay, let's. I'm going to stop this pretty soon. Let's see how much farther we can get. So here's some different asset types, which I've already mentioned. Hardware, such as the servers, the client computers, the networking devices themselves, the cameras, the printers, all of the other peripherals, all of the other interconnecting devices. The circuits themselves, the LAN circuits, the backbone networks, the WAN circuits, the internet access circuits. And I'll tell you right now, usually the most important circuits for any company, regardless of what you do, is the internet circuit. If your network is not connected to the internet, your employees might as well go home. There's nothing, if I didn't have this internet connection that I have right now to talk to you guys, we're dead because we're not in a classroom. If we lost internet access at U of H while I was in the middle of a class, I could probably still continue teaching a class. We would just have to look at some local assets on a local network there. But these days, since everything is in the cloud and everybody is in the cloud right now, you're all in the clouds right now, internet access is critical, absolutely critical. So that I put 100 on that in any of these spreadsheets I look at. Software, the operating systems, the applications that you use, and finally, the organizational data, which out of all of these, next to internet access, your organizational data is the most important asset. One, because it is data, it lives at layer 5. You can't just go out and buy more data. If a server dies or a hard drive dies, you can go down to Walmart sometimes and buy another hard drive. Or you can buy physical assets easily. You can go on Amazon.com and get something delivered tomorrow. You cannot buy data. The data is you. That is something you created. That's your intellectual property. Hopefully you saved it, you backed it up somewhere, but data is unique to every company. So that's one of the reasons why it's so critical. We identify threats by creating these threat scenarios, and we give them risk scores, as I was doing in that spreadsheet, from 1 to 100. We look at things like the impact. How many people will be impacted? What's the dollar amount that will be impacted, that will impact us by? And also, what's the likelihood of occurrence? Those are the 3 things we look at. How many people, whether that's employees or customers, are impacted? So that's why workstations go way down on the list, because workstation is going to affect 1 employee. A server going down is going to affect 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 employees or customers. The likelihood of occurrence, theft, for example. Theft, it's much more likely that a workstation or a laptop will be stolen. It's not very likely a server locked away in a server room at corporate headquarters or in a colo is going to be stolen. So theft of physical server assets is pretty low down. So we'll give that like a 5 or a 3 or maybe a nothing, maybe a 1. Here, the likelihood of occurrence of certain threats. You'll notice that viruses is way up here. Theft of equipment, this has actually gone way down. This is an old chart. Theft of information is way, way up. So this probably, theft of information, the likelihood of that occurring should be in the 80 to 90% range now. So out of these companies that were polled, 100% of companies responded, yes, we have been affected by viruses. But if you were to poll 100 companies today, I guarantee you, 100 companies of 100 or more employees, I guarantee you every single one of those companies will tell you, yes, we have had theft of information in the form of unauthorized access or accidental access, for example. Theft of equipment doesn't happen so much because, well, has anybody tried to sell a laptop lately or a server lately? You're not going to get much money for hardware anymore. Hardware doesn't cost that much. Hardware used to cost a lot, but it doesn't cost that much anymore. Also, it's pretty hard to sell hardware these days because we put security controls in place which render that hardware useless. Like, for example, if I know a lot of you have Androids and a lot of you have iPhones in here, what's the first thing you do after you've lost your Android or you think it's been stolen? What's the first thing you do?
Find my phone app.
Yeah, you use the Find My Phone app, and if it can't find it or the location is in somebody's house in the third ward, or I'm not picking on the third ward, I'm just saying it's inside somebody's house that you don't know, they've probably stolen it. So you either use the Google app or the Apple app, or you call your carrier and say, turn my phone off, or you change your password. It renders the phone unusable. And then you report that phone stolen. So unless they can figure out how to change the ESN number of that phone, they can't really use it anywhere else. Natural disaster, a little lower down the list. It depends on where you're at. Sabotage, that occurs. And it probably occurs more often than we get reported. A lot of times it doesn't get reported because good saboteurs can hide themselves well. And then finally, this thing called denial of service attack, which happens actually much more often now. I think I'll stop there because it's 3:50, and we'll take back up with this. But what I want you guys to do is download those two tools that I pointed out, or download different ones if you want. Those are just two that I found that didn't happen to have a bunch of adware crap in them and that weren't 30-day exploding versions, and they relatively did the job that I wanted them to do. Download those tools, run them on your local network, see what you find. Then, when we ever do get back to going to Starbucks or going out somewhere, go try them on a public network and see if you can find, I'm not telling you to be a hacker, but see if you can find some workstations that are out there on a public network where people have accidentally left things on and left things open. Exam 3 will be going up on the last day of class, by the way, April 27th. And then also, go review, and you can just, like I said earlier, go Google for NIST risk assessment guidelines. Download and read through the guide. Here's the easiest one to start with: Guide for Conducting Risk Assessment. It's not very long. It's, most of it is describing what it is, and the government, we don't have any liability if you screw up by using our rules. But so you can scroll through about the first 15 pages here, which means nothing, and start right here. This is a little abstract as to why you need to do risk assessment. Target audience, related, blah, blah, blah. Get down here to these and start looking at these items here, these figures, and conduct yourself a little risk assessment of your home network. Now, it might be overkill to use something like this, but see if you can identify in your home network all of your assets of your network, all of the threats that may affect your assets, like the likelihood, like, for example, in the natural disaster area, the likelihood of an earthquake, you can scratch that out. We're not going to have earthquakes in Houston. Likelihood of a flood, yeah, much more likely. Likelihood of threat, of theft, it all depends on where you live. If you live anywhere near U of H, theft is a consideration. If you live in an apartment complex, theft is a consideration. And see what you can come up with. This is not for an assignment. This is just, it's a good idea to do, because when you go get a job out there in the MIS management world, I guarantee you one of the first things they're going to have you do is either read a guideline that they've already internally created, or they're going to be using either the NIST or the Octave or the COBIT guidelines on conducting risk assessments, identifying the threats, identifying all of the assets, and identifying potential controls to mitigate the effect of those threats. Did you say to share our draw.io assignment? You can if you want. Some people emailed it to me. Oh, no, don't share it with Jake at uh.io and uh.edu. If you do a draw.io assignment, which is, by the way, an official assignment you do need to do for a grade. It's not extra credit. You need to do it, but it's easy to do. Share it with profjake@gmail.com. That's my
Professor, I
Gmail.
have a question
What's
about
that?
the assignment. So in an email, you said like, just design any network. And I went to go turn it in, and then it was like, create 4 Dell R415s that have this and that. And so I just did like just a random draw IO, but then it's like an assignment with very specific guidelines.
That's because it was specific to the lab, which we can't get access to right now. So all I'm saying is in that assignment, the only thing I really want you to pay attention to is actually get a draw.io account, use draw.io, start with one of the simple network templates and modify it significantly, and share it with me and let me take a look at it. So, and some, like I said, some people have already done that, and I've looked at some of them and given them some feedback. Not everybody. I'm still getting to them all. So be working on that now if you haven't already started on that. But the way you're going to submit it is just simply share it with profjake@gmail.com. I get an email that says, so-and-so, Rahi shared, or Roberto or whoever has shared a new document with me. And so I'll go check it out when I get those emails. I'll post this recording a little bit later on, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday, same time, okay?
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you for participating.